This is my final roundup of the 9th International Conference on Community-Based Adaptation, or CBA9, which was held in Kenya last week. It was a week-long event where we had roughly 150 international participants come at the beginning of the week, and we sent them in batches of about 20 to 9 different locations around Kenya. They spent 2 nights and 3 days hosted by local communities looking at what they were doing in terms of tackling climate change. And then they came back to Nairobi, and we were joined by several hundred others. So we had a total of roughly 400 people from 90 countries for the remaining 3.5 days of conferences in plenary and parallel sessions and out-of-the-box sessions and game-playing sessions and video sessions. So a lot of fun was had by all, and a lot of work was done as well. So I'll mention a couple of new things that came out of this particular conference. Firstly, it was focused on measuring and enhancing the effectiveness of adaptation. And it's an issue that is concerning everybody doing adaptation. How do we measure it? How do we demonstrate it? At the moment, there's a very strong top-down paradigm from the donors asking a value for money question of what are we doing for the money we get, which is a perfectly valid question, but is not the only question that can be made or answered. And particularly from the community's perspective, the perspective is very much not a money-driven perspective, but one of their vulnerability, their own resilience, their cultures, their ways of life, none of which have money values attached to them in their own settings. And so there are other values that they bring forward, which we hope would also inform the outcomes of the exercise. And in fact, we ended with a debate between Adrian Fitzgerald from Irish Aid and Atiq Rahman from Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, one arguing the donor perspective and one arguing the community perspective. In the end, it's obviously a tie. We need both. We can't have not just one but the other. But we need the right combination of that, and we're hoping that the proceedings of the conference and a publication after the conference with some papers will speak to this particularly technical issue of measurement and assessing adaptation. The second major breakthrough this time around has been in the private sector. We've tried very hard in the past, but unsuccessfully, to bring private sector on board. This time in Kenya, the Kenyan private sector really stepped up. The Kenya Private Sector Initiative on Climate Change came and did a session, and they have agreed on follow-up activities, and that I think is a major breakthrough for us, because community-based adaptation is not a very sexy issue for private companies until now. And the third innovation, if you like, is a follow-up country-to-country knowledge exchange between Kenya and Bangladesh. There was a big delegation from Bangladesh, from government and non-government actors, who met with their Kenyan counterparts, have invited them to come and visit Bangladesh, and hopefully a Bangladesh delegation will come and visit Kenya again later on during the year. So bilateral South-South exchanges of knowledge on tackling climate change is another outcome that we hope will go forward coming out of CBA9. And finally, we have a statement. We have what we call the Nairobi Declaration on Community-Based Adaptation to Climate Change, which highlights some of the things I already mentioned: the promotion of private sector, the promotion of South-South exchange, and on focus on measurement, but does also something different and to a bigger audience, a global audience, especially the leaders who are going to be convening to discuss finance for development in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia in July, and then again in New York in September to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals, and then thirdly and finally this year in December in Paris at the 21st Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The participants at the CBA9 conference felt that all of these, finance for development, Sustainable Development Goals, and climate change, are pertinent to the most poor and vulnerable people on the planet who are represented at this conference, and these people have given their voice to the leaders that they must take into account the needs and desires and voices of the most vulnerable in those agreements that they make at those important meetings later this year. And any agreement that fails to take account of the most vulnerable, in their opinion, would be a bad agreement, and we hope that will not happen.